Hey guys, it's me, Dr. Reed, and in this video we're going to be looking at skeletal muscle. Now, this is the beginning of our muscle unit, and we are going to be focusing on skeletal muscle for the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. We will talk about the other muscle tissues when we get to kind of their phase in it. So cardiac muscle we'll talk about when we do the cardiorespiratory system, and we'll talk about smooth muscle when we get to the digestive system. Now, skeletal muscle is going to be one where histologically it looks very uniform. So if we look here at a histological, so this is a cross-section or a histology slide of a skeletal muscle. And if you guys remember when we did the histology unit, we called the bands that we see, so all these different bands, all these lines, we called this striations. Let me just make that a smaller thing. There we go. So we called all these lines, we called them striations. And that's kind of where we left it when we talked about it in the histology unit. We were like, okay, there's striations in skeletal muscle. We also see that the nuclei are peripheral, right? So those are some of the things we talked about when we talked about histology. But today we're going to go a little deeper in what make up those striations. What are those striations that we're seeing? So just a reminder, this whole thing that we see here, that is a muscle fiber. And a muscle fiber can be broken down into fundamental units called sarcomeres. So if we look here at my drawing here, this whole thing is a muscle fiber. And the muscle fiber is then broken down into these multiple units, and those are known as sarcomeres. Okay. So those lines, those striations we're seeing is actually the orientation of these various sarcomeres within the muscle fiber. And the sarcomere is that fundamental functional unit that allows there to be contraction for the muscle to move things, right, and to contract. So when we look at a sarcomere, we have two defining proteins that are in the sarcomere, myosin and actin, also known as the thick filament and the thin filament. So in my image here, these kind of pink in the middle ones, that is our myosin. Our myosin is also known as our thick filament. These ones on the end, these are our actin, and actin is known as our thin filament. Now, how a contraction actually works, you're going to get into when you go into physiology, but just so you kind of understand why we have two proteins, essentially the myosin, these heads that you see right here, will crawl, when activated, will kind of crawl and pull together these actins. So the actin kind of act as a road on which the myosin pulls together. And so as these kind of pull this way and these pull this way, they're going to come towards this middle area. We call this middle area right here the M line. And these end areas that we see right here and right here, we call them the Z discs. So the parts that we've seen so far, we talked about the myosin are these thick filaments that are in the middle that have these heads. Then we have the actin on the outside, those are our thin filaments. The actin is attached to the Z discs on either end, and in the middle of the myosin is the M line, which is where everything's come together, right, in the M line. Okay. So now let's look at some of what we define some of these areas. So I kind of just color-coded it here as we come down. So in the middle is my M line. So we still call this, that's the M line, right in the middle. On either side of my M line, in the area where I only have myosin, so where I only see that I have myosin, I only see that I have thick filament, we call that our H zone. Okay, so from here to here, maybe if I do it this way, let me erase that. From here to here, that is my H zone. That is my zone that is going to be myosin only. H zone, myosin only. Then where we have overlapping, so if we kind of follow this down, right? Follow this down, where we have overlapping from the beginning to the end, that's going to be the length, you can call it, of my myosin. We call the length of the myosin, the whole part that has that thick filament, we call that our A band. And then we call the space where we have actin only, or the thin filament only, we call that our I band. So when we look at this, I can do like a little pointer. Here's my little pointer. M line's in the middle. H zone is where we're myosin only. Our I band is where we have actin only. And our A band is the length of the myosin, where I have myosin. So we have two bands, myosin, actin only. And we have one zone, the H zone. And you guys will talk more about this again when you get into physiology. And you kind of go more into how this function, how these contractions actually occur at a microscopic level. But what I want you to see in this image is that I can see these A bands and the I bands, and those A and I bands are what create the striations that we see in this image. So the A bands are our dark bands. They're dark because they're thick, right? The A band is the myosin is thick, so we see it. So the dark bands are the A bands, and the light bands, oh, I wrote light band. I should have wrote I band. So the I band is our light coloration of the striation. And you can see in the I band, we have this line in the middle. That's actually our Z disc right there. And then again, in this image, we're seeing that these are pointing to the nuclei that are peripheral nuclei. Remember that they are peripheral in skeletal muscle. Now, the other main kind of general makeup that you need to know when we're talking about skeletal muscle is the different skeletal muscle coverings. So we just looked at an individual muscle fiber. Individual muscle fibers are surrounded, so just the muscle fiber. So if here was just the muscle fiber that we just talked about that has the striations, this one muscle fiber is going to be surrounded. Oops, why did it do that way? Here, I'll just do it this way. It's going to be surrounded, so kind of enveloping as if you took like saran wrap around that one muscle fiber by connective tissue. The surrounding of a singular muscle fiber is known as the endomysium. So endomysium surrounds one muscle fiber. We put multiple muscle fibers together. So if I put multiple, so let's kind of zoom out and say that I put a bunch of muscle fibers together. Okay, so here's my bunch of muscle fibers together. My bunch of muscle fibers together, we call that a fascicle. So a fascicle is multiple muscle fibers. A fascicle is then they're kind of grouped together and surrounded by another connective tissue sheath. The sheath that surrounds a fascicle is known as the perimysium. Now, an entire muscle, the muscle you think of when I think of my biceps brachii or my triceps, or I think of my biceps femoris or my rectus abdominis, right? We're thinking of those big muscles. Those are made up of multiple fascicles. So when we have multiple fascicles, we get one big muscle. So I'm just going to draw here, just like that, right? That's my one big muscle. And that muscle is then covered, that surrounding the entire muscle is something known as, so surrounding this whole thing, the covering around the whole muscle is known as the epimysium. So Endo, E-N-D-O, is in. It is it's the smallest surrounding that we have. It surrounds just the muscle fiber. The fascicle is surrounded by peri, and the whole muscle is surrounded by epi. So if we look at this image right here, this black outline that we see right there is surrounding an entire muscle. Or, yeah, so right here. Or not an entire muscle, but it's surrounding, this is a fascicle right here. So that black line that I just drew is a fascicle. Here's another fascicle up here. And here's another fascicle right here. And then this right here is surrounding this entire muscle that we're seeing there. So the one where we see it's surrounding the entire muscle, so right here, we call that the epimysium, entire muscle. That's that connective tissue. The black line that I just drew that was surrounding the fascicle is going to be the perimysium. And then surrounding a singular muscle fiber, so like right there, right here, right there, those are going to be our endomysium. So those are going to be our general things we need to know about skeletal muscle. In the next video, we're going to look more deeply into our big muscles that make up the axial muscular system. If you have any questions, let me know, and I'll see you in class.